Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for joining me for another Alfred Hitchcock Presents review. Today I will be talking about Season 3, Episode 8, Last Request, starring Harry Guardino as Gerald, Cara Williams as Mona, and Hugh Marlowe as District Attorney Bernard Butler. And this is a good, solid episode in my opinion. The plot is well constructed. It's pretty interesting for the most part. And this episode is very fast-paced in my opinion. It packs a lot into 25 minutes. However, for the same reasons, I don't think this is quite a great episode, as the main character is fleshed out well enough, but a lot of the side characters are in the episode so briefly that they feel more like plot devices than they are characters you actually know anything about. But overall, Last Request is still a solid, very watchable episode in my opinion. So we start with our main character, Gerald, and he's in prison. He's going to be executed for a murder that he says he didn't commit. He says he's innocent, and he basically says this is all the fault of the district attorney who's always had it out for him, and just is kind of incompetent overall. So he decides with his last request he's going to write this letter proving his point about the DA. Once and for all. So an interesting setup for the episode. So we get the rest of the episode told in flashbacks with Gerald narrating, and I thought this worked fine in the case of this episode. So first off, we see a brief scene between Gerald and the DA, and they're basically talking. It turns out Gerald's been arrested a lot of times but never convicted. It turns out that all these crimes he's supposed to have committed involved women, but the women will never testify against him or just don't want him to get into their own kind of trouble, basically. So he always gets away with it. But the DA warns Gerald that one day he will catch him in the act of something and he will put him away. So at this point, we go to the next scene where Gerald is introduced to a woman named Mona, who will be important later in the episode. But we get sidetracked at this point, and we meet another woman named Nancy, and we get to see Gerald use his charms in action. He gets on this woman's good side pretty quickly. It was pretty impressive, I guess, if you're into that kind of thing. So basically, they chat, and he decides he's going to go over to Nancy's house. They talk. It's also known at this point that she has a gun, which usually in Alfred Hitchcock Presents means it's going to be used at some point, I'm just saying. So he kisses her, and conveniently right at this moment, her husband walks in. This guy, just very suddenly, he slaps his wife, Nancy. He also attacks Gerald, who then, of course, shoots him. This all happens very quickly, but the scene worked fine for me. No real problems here. So at this point, of course, though, it turns out that the DA says that, the wife must have killed the husband and then herself. So basically, he's not able to get Gerald for this crime. So at this point, Gerald gets away with it, but he gets involved in some gambling. It turns out he owes a lot of money, but he can't really pay it. At this point, Mona, who we were introduced to earlier in the episode, comes over to him, and she hints that she might know more about him and the woman Nancy that was murdered than she's let on. So at this point, Gerald gets upset with her. Basically, all Mona wants is some money. She calls it a loan, but it didn't seem like a loan to me. So, of course, at this point, Gerald waits for Mona, and when she comes outside of the lounge at work, he knocks her out, killing her, basically. But once again, the district attorney gets the wrong man, and her husband gets convicted of the crime. So at this point, Gerald, is admitting that he committed all these crimes, but that the DA couldn't pin them on him, which is interesting considering what happens at the end of the episode. So at this point, we go to yet another scene with Gerald. Like I said, there's a lot of scenes and a lot of things that happen in this episode very quickly. And he's met this other woman named Sheila, and they're making out kissing. And once again, there's a call that Gerald owes money. Apparently, he's still been gambling and not winning. So this woman, Sheila, says she'll pay basically, but she kicks him out. She says she doesn't want any more to do with him, which is also important to the plot. So at this place, Gerald goes to pay off his debts to a man named Clark, I think, but the guy is already dead. So it turns out that Gerald couldn't have killed him, but the woman Sheila lied about being with him, probably to save herself from getting into trouble. So basically, the DA is convinced that Gerald killed this guy Clark, which I thought interestingly enough was a man at this point and not a woman, which is what he's usually involved with. But anyway, this is the crime that Gerald's to be executed over, and it's amazingly enough, it's the one time he didn't kill the person. So at this point, Gerald finishes the letter and sends it off, and he figures at least, I proved my point about this district attorney, but it turns out, as always happens in Alfred Hitchcock Presents, that Gerald gets what's coming to him because the DA comes to visit him. He says, you're going to be, acquitted of this crime because the woman Sheila changed her testimony. You couldn't have killed this guy Clark, but it's too late for Gerald because his letter's already been sent out. So, he's basically admitted to committing all these other murders. So it looks like Gerald is probably in big trouble anyway. So a solid twist ending where Gerald, gets what's coming to him, I guess you could say. Like I said, there's a lot that happens in this episode. It's very well constructed and very fast paced. All the plot comes together well. But I did feel like, all the side characters were kind of just there as props. You didn't really know anything about them. It was just from point A to point B to point C very quickly. Not a lot of dramatic impact, in my opinion, to this episode, but still a solid, enjoyable episode to watch at least once. So I'm going to give Last Request a 3 out of 5, and I do recommend this episode for fans of the series. So 3 out of 5 for Last Request, and as always, thank you very much for watching.